In 1975, a young photographer, Daniel Meadows, took up the post of photographer in residence for Pendle Council, documenting and photographing working life in the mills of East Lancashire. Over 50 years later, on the 18th of July 2026, Daniel returned to Queen Street Mill, one of the workplaces he photographed over half a century before, where he was interviewed by Laurie Peake MBE, the director of British Textile Biennial.
What I was interested to discover is that Daniel wasn't invited up here to take photographs of the mills. So I wonder, Daniel, whether you'd like to just describe how it came to be that you landed here.
Okay, why was I here? I'd completed an earlier project. I'm a southern boy, so listen, I realise I have you all know more about this part of the world than I do, and so I'm very happy for people to correct anything I say. But I can tell you why I was here. I'd been an art student at Manchester Polytechnic from 70 to 73. And from 73 to 75, I'd been living in a double-decker bus, travelling around the country, doing a national portrait of the British, which is the project that I'm probably best known for. But actually, the piece of work I like best is the one that's on the walls here. I'd moved to Heptonstall, where I had written the book about my journey around Britain. And I paid for that by working for British Road Services, driving wagons for Kellogg's in Manchester. So I used to write the book at night and print pictures in this damp little cottage in Heptonstall and drive lorries during the day, delivering tons of cornflakes and Rice Krispies, but hopefully not Scandibrod, which was very heavy and in very small boxes and took forever to shift around. Kellogg's effort at muesli. Yeah, muesli. What was that? Anyway, yes, so I was living in Heptonstall, and I saw an advertisement, and Laurie asked me earlier where would I have seen the advertisement for a photographer, an artist in residence to the borough of Pendle. And I can only think it was either the arts pages of The Guardian or Artist Newsletter, which was probably the place I saw it. You subscribe to it. This obviously, for everybody who's young, was ages before the internet, ages before mobile telephony. Such things had not even been considered or thought about. So yeah, you used to subscribe to things like Artist Newsletter and see what jobs there were around. There was a job advertised for photographer in residence to the borough of Pendle. And it was a consortium that was like everything to do with the arts, but there's never any money, so people have to get together and borrow bits and chip in. And so everybody had their own agenda. It started because the Calhoun Gulbenkian Foundation in Lisbon, which was Turkish oil money, diverted into supporting the arts, don't ask. They were trying to introduce an artist in residence program in Britain, where they took artists out of galleries and studios and put them into communities. And then they followed that up with academic study, what we all did. I remember being interviewed when I was here by an academic who came to follow all of that up. They advertised that they'd match fund a project like that, and Pendle obviously picked up on it. It happened that 1975 was Architectural Heritage Year, and they wanted someone to photograph 800, well, it was between, I always forget whether it's 600 or 800 buildings, or 800 photographs around buildings, but anyway, it was all the pre-industrial buildings in Pendle. I knew nothing about that, and I was quickly given a copy of Vernacular Architecture, which is still on my bookshelf, teaching me about what pre-industrial architecture looked like. So that was the main job that they wanted doing from Pendle Borough Council. The college wanted me to relate to the community, I never really knew what that. I'm going like this because we were all kind of, you know, it's kind of post-hippie time. Yeah, man, you know, just relate to the community. Take your headphones off, listening to Amagama or something. You know. Prog rock time. Yeah, relate to the community, man. And then Mid-Pennine Arts, which was totally tricky because Mid-Pennine Arts wasn't in Pendle. No. It supported the arts in Pendle, but it was in Burnley. And here in Queen Street Mill, you're 400 yards out of Pendle. You're over the border. Yeah, I mean, if I stepped in here and took some pictures, it was, what's he doing? He's not on our patch. It was trouble. But I did, nevertheless. Anyway, so I applied for this job, and yeah, Mid-Pennine were there at the interview, and Jenny Wilson was the woman in charge at that time, and David Moore was the principal of the college, Nelson and Cole, and there was somebody from the Borough Council there, planning department. They interviewed me and they offered me the job. I don't know how many people else they interviewed, but anyway. Mid-Pennine wanted me to photograph their theatre education company called Theatre Mobile, and also Welfare State International. We have somebody here from Welfare State International. Two people from Welfare State International. Yeah, a little bit of applause. These people were part of a complete revolution in how spectacular theatre could be embraced in the community, and they were part of building something in Burnley called Parliament in Flames in 1976, where they built the Houses of Parliament in the middle of Burnley. And people were just watching every day. This thing got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they went around the town with marching bands. I've got a recording of him walking around in a solar topi, playing music, recruiting people to make guys, but to do them more interestingly. And then all these guys were marched up onto this huge platform, middle of the town, Houses of Parliament, massive crane, 30-foot high guy on a crane. Everything rubbish, everything taken out of the mills, all stuff that was all being thrown away. A lot of mills were closing down. They built this huge thing, and then on bonfire night they burned the lot down.
We should do it again.
Yeah. But yeah, so I've worked for Mid-Pennine, I worked for the college, and I worked for the local authority. And the 800 buildings, I thought, right, this is something I'm not that interested in. But I thought, right, I'm going to buckle down and do it. And they thought it would take me the 2 years. And I did it in 3 months. I was quite a hard-working bloke at that time. And I had this old minivan, and I just drove round and round and around all these lanes. But I learned my way around the patch very quickly. And the thing that just I could not believe was the mills. You know, I'm a southern boy, and you come up here, and you see these chimneys, and then you walk into a place like this, and you know, the moment you walk in, it's like stepping through the looking glass. You're in a completely other world of the noise, but also the language. People, they spoke with their hands and listened with their eyes, and they, you know, you hold this for a second. You go into the mill, and they go, what? And you go, taking some pictures, and they go, film? And you go, I was trying to think of print, so like a book. Oh, book? Yeah, well, kind of. I don't know, I haven't got a publisher. What does that mean? No, shut up. Yeah. So then, you know, well, the point is you only had to do that once. But you know, you set off around the mill taking pictures, and people would start asking, oh, what's the book going to be? Who's going to publish it? Because they all knew, because they could see what had gone on in someone's lips. And this incredible noise, and just that thing I couldn't. But the first time I came into a weaving shed was here, because someone had said, have you been to Harle Syke? They've got a Victorian steam engine. It's all running, it's up and running, 1,000 looms, go and have a look. And I just could not believe it when I came here. But it was in Burnley, and I was supposed to be in Pendle. So I went looking for one in Pendle, and the Bancroft shed in Barnolwick was also running. And yeah, so that's when I got stuck into working in the mills. Yeah, but it was fit into the spaces in between doing all the other jobs.
and obviously understand that fascination that you had coming from the south and not having seen this kind of landscape, but also the kind of the culture of the people here, because you know that's the, for me, the kind of stunning power of your photographs, those people, and capturing. I mean, you know, I was born in 1957, and I was born and brought up in a village called Barrowford, which at that point is now very chic and it's got designer shops and stuff, but then it was just an ordinary mill village with 5 working mills when I was little. So you're immersed in it, and my mum and dad were weavers, and the air smelled of cotton. We were remarking that the lovely thing about here is you can still smell the cotton. When they delivered cotton to the mills, the air would be full of cotton dawn, you know, from the raw cotton bales. And my dad would come home from work in his blue overalls, and they would look white because they'd be covered in cotton dawn. And so what is extraordinarily moving for me seeing your photographs is how you've captured that culture, really, which has I think for me sadly disappeared, and it's extraordinary that can disappear in a lifetime. So I just wonder if you could tell us a bit more about you escaping from the drudgery of the residency and your adventure into discovering the mills.
Well, key to it all really was a guy called Stanley Graham, who features in the photographs, who was the mill engineer in Bancroft Shed in Barnoldswick, James Nutter and Sons. I mean, it couldn't be better, could it? It's called Nutter. It's just wonderful, isn't it? James Nutter and Sons, Bancroft Shed, Barnoldswick. And Stanley was the mill engineer there, and he was very welcoming. He was is the word autodidact? Someone who was very keen at teaching himself. Maybe he hadn't passed all the right exams when he was young, but he was somebody who was... I mean, we sat round and discussed philosophy, and I mean, we were really big into Ivan Illich at that time, reading Deschooling Society and Tools for Conviviality. And I just thought it was one, you could go into a mill engine house, and you're sitting there with a bloke who's in charge of this enormous machine, who's completely relaxed about it, where huge lumps of metal are moving around, and the whole of the prosperity of the mill and all the people in it depend on him keeping that thing running quietly. And because he's so in control of it, he can spare time to sit around and eat his sandwiches, brew me a cup of tea, and we sit around discussing Illich. I mean, and I loved it. And also he was always welcoming. And eventually, so I went there to Bancroft, and I got on well with Stanley, and he became a kind of passport to the mills, because he introduced me to lots of other people not only in his own mill, but people who came to Bancroft to service it for other jobs. So there were 2 of those jobs which feature here. The exhibition's called Shuttles because it's in the weaving shed and you see all the weavers and so on. It's called Steam because of Stanley and the steam engine. And it's called Soot because everything depended on burning coal, and there was a boiler which was usually pretty invisible. It was buried somewhere in a boiler house. But that was where the coal was burned and the steam was produced. And out of the back of the boiler there was a flue that ran to a chimney, and then everybody knows the skyline full of chimneys in this part of the world. Well, somebody had to service those boilers, somebody had to clean them out, somebody had to climb the chimneys. And they were quite a bunch of hard blokes. I mean, if you're going to be crawling around in boiler flues in a weekend where the steam's just been let out over the weekend while you do the work, you're crawling into something that is boiling hot. I mean, it's so hot, it would burn your hand if you touched the metal, and yet they're crawling into these things. And the same with the steeplejacks. You know, you've got to climb this thing that's, even if it's only a little chimney like this, this is probably, I don't know, 110 feet or something. It's not a giant chimney. There were chimneys that went up 300 metres. I mean, vast things. But so Stanley was the guy who introduced me to all these other people. And then getting to know those people was, again, a remarkable privilege. And also for me, as a southern boy who'd been to college and all the rest of it, didn't know anything. You're still bloody wet behind the ears, Meadows, Stanley used to say to me all the time. I was 23, you know. I came in 1975 when I was 23 years old, so I was wet behind the ears, you know. I didn't know anything. And he taught me a lot of stuff, and then the people I met taught me a lot of stuff. But they weren't easy, you just didn't wander into their lives. You know, for the most part they'd ignore you. You know, who's this bloke who's in the way, you know. It's probably a spy from the tax man or something, you know, you're just like the enemy. So you've got to take time to work in and get to know people. One of the things I did that a lot of documentary photographers didn't do, I think, was that I did a lot of audio recordings. But I started doing them mainly just to get the captions right, because everything's to do with technical stuff. And there's, you know, they talk to you about the left-hand frog in the loom. You know, what? You got a left-handed frog in the loom? What's that about? So you needed to make certain that you recorded it and you knew what. But then the recordings were just about good enough quality to be able to, you know, be an archive in themselves. So there are some bits of audio playing in there. And I gradually got to know people well enough to be able to go around to their houses and put the tape recorder on the floor and talk to them. I was always showing people the pictures I'd done of them, and then we would be able to, you know, build a relationship on those kind of bases. But it was always on the edge, you know, like just one thing go wrong and you know that, you know, you're not going to be invited back again.
The relationship.
Yeah.
And so you're taking 800 photographs of bits of vernacular architecture, and obviously taking hundreds of photographs in the mills and the welfare state. Where did all that happen? Where was the dark room?
Yeah, well, I was given a council house as part of the job. There were pros and cons with working for Pendle Borough Council and being an artist in residence. One was they gave me a council house, but it was a house that was about to be demolished.
On Surrey.
It's on Surrey Road. It's now under the M56. Yeah. So I lived opposite the cricket ground, and my neighbour, in a semi-detached house, my neighbours were cricket fans. So I learned all about Leary, Constantine, and CLR James, and all that history. I began to learn about all the socialist history and politics that went around the mills and stuff. And also because the house was about to be pulled down and I was its last tenant, they let me knock it about. So I put in a really nice darkroom in there, actually. I built everything myself, built the darkroom. And but that was the upside. The downside was there was no money for materials. I don't know how they thought they could employ someone. Oh, it seems a good enough wage until you realise, oh, wait a minute, there's no money for materials. 800 buildings is quite a lot of film. So I began to start doing little freelance jobs for London publications. I'd go down in the summer and spend a week staying with friends, sleeping on people's sofas and whatever, and knocking on the doors of newspapers and magazines. And I also made a good relationship with Lancashire Life here in Lancashire, who would take my stories when I'd done them and publish them. And so that I could make a bit of money to buy the materials, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do any of this material, this stuff in the mills. Yes, so I lived in that house for nearly 2 years, and then they put the rent up. They went to pull the house down, they put the rent up. They wanted 10 quid a week, and I thought, that's ridiculous. So I went to have it out with the bloke from the borough council. I said, you're trying to be 10 quid a week for a house you're going to pull down? And he said, oh, that's nothing. He said, I'll sell you one for a fiver with 90% improvement grant if you want, in Cole. You've got streets of houses like that in Cole, you can have one today. I said, what's the catch? You've got to stay for 5 years. 5 years? What? I'm 23. No, I was 25 by then. 5 years. It's like a prison sentence. I don't know, it just all seemed too much. So then I discovered, I went to an estate agent and discovered you could buy a house for 7 quid a week, which is what I did in Barnoldswick, yeah. You married, did you live over the brush? Aye, I live over the bush in Barley. Right. Yeah, so I moved to Barnoldswick then. And I did stay on for a couple of years. I stayed on till 1981 we moved, yeah. Yeah, by then I'd married Georgie, who came up from the south. And yeah, so we had, our first son was born in Airedale General Hospital. Yeah, because see, Barnoldswick's, as you rightly say, it used to be in Burnley, Nelson and Colne, but then they changed the border.
So Barnoldswick was in Yorkshire.
I know.
Yeah.
Craven. What?
Yeah.
They moved something from Yorkshire into Lancashire?
Oh, there was an uproar.
I bet. Yeah. No, there was still blood in the streets when I was there. Yeah, it was quite a thing.
Yeah.
But you see, they all looked out towards the Dales.
Mm.
And so, like, you know, like Stanley's daughters we had 3 daughters, they were all in the Young Farmers Club.
Mm.
And they all went out towards, you know, they met in pubs called the Craven Herald and were out in in the Dales.
Yeah.
I did a big story about a farmer killing a pig out there. I got in terrible trouble. I mean, it's very odd, the Nelson leader didn't like me for some reason. I couldn't work, I don't know why, but I do actually.
Wow.
Well, I thought, I went to say to him, I said, look, I'm the photographer in residence. I'm making all these pictures. It'd be quite nice if you published one every now and again, and then people could see that I was doing stuff and I wasn't wasting public money, because it was always, who pays your wages then? It's like, what? They pay you to stand around and take pictures when we're all bloody working, you know, I mean, it was like that. And so I thought if we could just have a nice relationship with the local paper, they published a picture. And they were all, you come up here when you want us to use your pictures. It was a bit like that. And then it was, I insisted, I said, look, you've got to pay me. If you do use them, you've got to pay me. What? You know, I said, I haven't got any money for materials. You know, if you gave me £5 a week, that's like 3 rolls of film. That's pretty good, you know. I mean, I shot hundreds of rolls of film while I was here, and but they wouldn't have it. And then when I did the exhibition towards the end, I did a big exhibition in the Arndale Centre. The local paper ran an article that sort of went through the sets of pictures I'd done. Not on patch, not in Pendle, outside of the area.
Yeah.
Photographer in residence to Pendle, outside the area.
Yeah.
God, there's only 400 yards to Queen Street. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, so it was a pity we didn't hit it off.
But I think it shows incredible commitment and dedication that you actually stayed here and I mean, you know, from my conversations with you so far, it just feels like you fell in love with the area, you know, because you enjoyed no end of kind of hardship, really, and difficulty, and actually it was a real labour of love, it seems to me. And what is extraordinary is how you immersed yourself in the whole kind of technical side of the mills and understanding how they worked. And you know, what emerges is an incredible picture, rounded picture of the economy, you know, not only the social life, the industrial life, but it's a whole picture of how this economy actually kept kept spinning, and sorry, pardon the pun, moving, and you know, I always think it's quite extraordinary. So Nelson, I'd always remember, was the fastest growing town in the UK in 1900. I mean, if you look at the population growth graph, it's just unbelievable from 1800 to 1900, where it says in the exhibition, you know, there were people coming, immigrants from all over the UK to work here because it was the fastest growing economy in the country. And in that, you know, we all know the huge colonial global project that we were all caught up in here. You know, that it was the kind of end of that journey that started in West Africa, where the ships were bringing enslaved labourers to the southern states of America, which of course had been bought when they brought cotton seed from India. They'd put a stop to production of cotton in India because they saw how lucrative it was and wanted it here. And by here, we mean here in East Lancashire. You know, the cotton was coming in from the southern states of America through the port of Liverpool. So why didn't it stop in Liverpool? Why wasn't that industry started there? Well, three things which I'm telling you, but I don't know if everybody else has kind of realised it. But one, and you will have photographed some of the handloom weavers' cottages. One, there was a huge skill base here of handloom weaving, of flax into linen and fleece into wool, and it's what people wore, and it's what they themselves wore. But also, it became quite a big export business. So there were pack ponies taking them to the peace halls in Yorkshire and then down to London. And we at the Textile Biennial discovered a few years ago, we heard about a piece of cloth having been found in the Derbyshire Records Office called the Penistone cloth, and it was a tiny fragment of woolen fabric, coarse woolen fabric, dyed with indigo, so it looked like a denim blue. And it had a label attached, and I think it was something like 1789. And it was in one of the grand houses in Derbyshire, a plantation owner who owned a cotton plantation in Barbados, sugar plantation. And the label affixed said Penistone cloth, suitable for the purpose of basically clothing enslaved labour, and that became a massively lucrative market for the spinners and weavers here. And who knows if they knew the destination of what that destination was, and I very much doubt it. But that was the beginning of that whole trajectory to where we are now. And the mechanisation obviously accelerated that. But the two other things that this area had was rain. We all know, although things are changing now. You needed a damp climate for the spinning of the cotton, particularly to keep the yarn flexible, and fast-flowing rivers. For first of all the water wheels that ran the looms, and then the steam engines. So it continued, and it's incredible to think, and it really interested me to think that you were photographing that pre-industrial architecture, including the handloom weavers' cottages, and then photographing then the result, what had started there and what it had become, and then you were there just as it tipped into decline. And it always astounds me that it was such a short amount of time in the history of civilization, and yet it completely shaped this area to what it is now. And when the mills are closed, and the kind of demographics we have here, and the economy and employment and poverty, actually, if you look at a map of the UK, the government publishes maps of multiple deprivation, and there's a big deep red gash running through East Lancashire, deep red being the most multiply deprived communities, and that gash basically follows the line of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal and the mills that it fed, and like you say, it's interesting. Bancroft really is the end of the valley really, and then it becomes rural. I think what staggers me really is how you were there at that tipping point really, and I wonder if, I doubt at 23 you would have realised that.
No, well, I did, because I was very serious in trying to understand it, and I took myself off to college, not college, but they had a little college at Smith and Nephew where they trained weavers. I don't know if it was a college, it was a training place. Internal. Oh, right, yeah. Okay. So, and I thought, I don't understand anything of this, and I got talking to the people at Smith and Nephew, and they said, well, why don't you come along and, you can just be in the room and the young weavers are learning the job, which was fascinating to me. First of all, you had to be extremely good at maths, apart from anything else. There's a little book I used to have, which was one weaver from 1935. The way she calculated how much she was owed, depending on what kind of cloth she was weaving. And there's a few books that I collected from junk shops and around the place at that time. I've just given them to the museum here. So yeah, I did take all that stuff very seriously. I also was fascinated by the politics. In the, they always say in Nelson in the 1920s they painted the town hall steps red, and there were lots of strikes and so on.
Little Moscow.
Little Moscow, and I got to know people there there were two people politically I got to know quite well. One was Albert Shaw, who was the secretary of the Weavers Association, and all these people lived their politics. They were campaigning along with Michael Foote to get a May Day bank holiday for the workers, as happened in the Soviet Union, and they secured it, I think, in 1978 or something. But he was already having a May Day celebration. He used to have this wonderful totem pole which had words like strings on it, and they'd have words tied on with labels like cooperation and socialism and pacifism and internationalism. And he'd invite people and they'd bring their children and he'd talk to them about what socialism was about, but not in a kind of ranty way. He'd just sit down quietly like you were reading kids a story or something, and he'd just talk about this or that in relation to the work that people were doing in this area and the work they had done. I loved Albert Shaw. He was a wonderful man, and I did do some quite long tape recordings with him, and they are in the Bodleian Library now in Oxford. The other person I met, and I'm going to be talking about him tomorrow in Clarion House, is Stan Iverson, who was the last chair of the Independent Labour Party. So I had to learn my politics. The Labour Party that I thought I understood was the Labour Party, but actually it had broken away from its original roots, which were pacifist and internationalist. And the Independent Labour Party had stayed behind as a kind of rump of it, but a kind of pure piece of socialism. And dear old Stan was the last chair of it before it became public. It changed its name from Independent Labour Party to Independent Labour Publications, ILP. Anyway, he talked about, a lovely bit. He talks about I were going to socialist Sunday school in my pram. I were a nipper, you know, being pushed in his pram from Nelson to the Clarion House.
Yeah.
And going to socialist Sunday school. And then he said, we don't need almighties. I love it. He said, we don't need almighties to be taught what's right. We had morals and ethics.
Yeah, I remember going to the Clarion most Sundays with my dad, you know, walking from Barriford to Newchurch and having a cup of tea and a tomato butty or something at the Clarion. And I do think that, you know, looking back on my childhood and teenage years, that we had an instinctual kind of inbred notion of politics, and politics wasn't something that happened in Westminster. You know, it was it affected. You knew that it affected every part of your life, and that also that you had a stake in it and an agency in it. And of course, you know, all the working men's clubs, the tacklers, the dressers, the overlookers, you know, it affected every facet of your life. Those unions and the voices and obviously you know your leisure life as well with places like the Clarion. And I think, you know, for me, looking at the exhibition, that kind of all comes flooding back, and I think, you know, I know we joke about it, but I would never say I come from Pendle. Pendle is a hill, but Burnley, Cone and Nelson were very well known in elections. You know, on the telly or the news reports, they would always keep a watching eye on how the voting was going in Burnley, Cone and Nelson, because it was so politicised, and I guess it was because of that huge population boom, you know, through the early 20th century, and the kind of parallel of the unionisation with that just kind of became second nature. I wonder if you went to any of the working men's clubs.
I didn't go to the working men's clubs, but I did winkle. I like to work with individuals. I've always been suspicious of groups because, I don't know, maybe it's something to do with my upbringing, but I like if I could just sit down with one person and listen to them, and then go away and read up on the things they told me. So the woman who's interviewed, the weaver who's interviewed in the little film that's in the exhibition, is Bessie Dickinson. She'd been a long-term member of the Communist Party, and she was my age now. I'm 74. She was 76, I think, when I interviewed her. So she was thinking back to the time of the First World War when she'd been a girl and started working in the mill, and she just would tell me little things that then made, as it were, pictures in my head that I could then kind of use in the storytelling. So she started talking to me about the different, the sexual politics of the mill. So there are two things there. One is that the men had the power in that they were the tacklers, they were the engineers, and they were also the people that allocated warps. So if you wanted a good warp, you had to keep in with your tackler. And tacklers were also notoriously taken the mick out of by the women for being lazy. And so the one picture of a tackler I have in there, he's actually asleep. It's probably a bit unfair, it was his lunch break. But anyway, he's asleep, yeah. So, but I would listen to people telling me things, and that would give me a thought for, you know, when I saw a tackler asleep, I had to take a picture of him because, you know, you had that thing. And also there was this thing you had to, you know, when people were poor and hungry and needed a good warp, you know, what kind of favours do women give to men? These stories were alive in the mills once you started talking to people. And that was kind of spooky as well. Then the other thing was that the Weavers' Union, although there were men weavers, on the whole, the people who were the workers were all women, the weavers were all women, and the union was never more than an association. It was never recognised as being one of the big unions. And that was mainly because it was represented by women, and women didn't have, to begin with, they didn't have the vote, but then they didn't have representation in Parliament. So there was a massive amount of sexual politics, and it's kind of summed up in the exhibition in a little piece that I did with Bessie. And she's talking about the two different kinds of shuttle. There was a kissing shuttle and a shuttle with a slot in it. And the kissing shuttle was a shuttle that you could only thread by sucking the thread through the little hole. And the problem with that was that if there was disease in the mill, it would spread very quickly. And she talks about how she was, whatever it was, 12 years old, and she's given money by the employer to go along and have a chest tapped by the doctor, Dr. Alderton in Barnoldswick, and he taps all their chests, and she gives them half a crown or whatever it is, and he passes them all for work. And then within a few years, quite a few of those girls had died of TB, and that was through shuttle kissing. And it wasn't and the women in the Weavers Association were constantly campaigning to get Act of Parliament to make certain there was a slot in the shuttle. And so although there are a million shuttles here, the two that are in the vitrine, the glass box in the exhibition, one is a kissing shuttle and one is one with a slot in it. And from I think it was sometime in the Second World War, 42, I think, there was an act passed, and you had to have a slot. If you made a new shuttle, you had to have a slot in it. And there was a shuttle factory in Barrowford, just down the road from you, Holstein Shuttles, and so I went and photographed that. So yes, you're absolutely right. I was informed by the things that people were telling me when I interviewed them, and I used these things. I was looking for a visual equivalent of these things to make the pictures, for what became the exhibition.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about sexual politics as well, and one fact that still sticks in my mind, that in that period, this area had the highest illegitimacy rates. And I remember reading an article, probably when I was in my 20s actually, that it surmised that was because the mills were the only industry in the country where men and women worked side by side. So there was, you would mix with men far more than you would if you were in any other industry. And, my grandmother, who started work in the mill when she was 13, like they all did, and my mother were shameless flirts, and would use all their womanly charms to charm the tackler, because that was key. You had to have the tackler wrapped around your little finger so that when your loom went down, he came to you first, because that's how you were making your money. And I remember very many pretty Laurie stories about those kind of relationships. But I mean, all the women, I think, as a result, were incredibly independent women, because it was one of the few industries where women could make money, particularly if you kept your loom running and you were a good weaver. And also it's very flexible working for women, so that my mum and my grandma ran I think 8 looms actually together, and they just had to keep those looms running for the whole 2 shifts, and so they would so it was what the loom was producing, not the person was producing, and when my sister's 10 years older than me, when she was a baby, it was very convenient because it simply exchanged the baby at the mill gates. So my gran would look after her on the off shift and so on. And I think, and again, you know, it creates a very particular character and identity.
Yes, there were a lot of stories, but there were other things that also come to mind from working with the men. I want to talk a bit about the cleaning the flues, because Pat is here. Pat was, I thought he was 14, he told me he was 16, but Pat was, his dad, Charlie, is Charlie Sutton, who is a flue cleaner who I photographed. Charlie had a family firm called Well Done, and they basically swept the boiler flues in this area. I mean, I'm sure there were other people who do it. There were many of them, yeah. And of course there was, and Charlie is somebody I carry very much in my head, and I'm very happy to be corrected, Pat, if any of this isn't right with you. But Charlie he was a pretty hard man, I think, and he was a Catholic, and he'd married, I mean, this international thing you're talking about, he married an Italian woman in Barrowford, who was the most beautiful person in Barrowford. She was, sorry, in Briarfield. And he called her the Sophia Loren of Briarfield. Isn't that right? This is your mum. And she's still alive?
She's 96 last week.
Wow. And she was absolutely, I mean, I knew her when she was about 40, and she was the most ebullient and lively person. And I remember going round there one evening with Stanley. We'd take a bottle of whiskey and we'd stay until it was all drunk, and then other people came and they also, but some of them had been in the pub. Benny and Hot, they used to drink Benny and Hot before they came round. I mean, you're all Burnley people, you know about Benny and Hot, but it was quite, you know, all these histories about Europe and the Empire and war. I mean, they drank Benedictine very specifically in Briarfield, because that group of people had been in, was it the East Lancashire Rebellion or whichever? That was it, the East Lancashire Rifles or something, had been stationed in Fécamp in France, and stuck in a monastery where the only thing to drink was Benedictine, and they got a taste for it. And they used to drink Benny and Hot, and then we'd meet up at Charlie's house with hot water, and he'd meet up at Charlie's place, and then Stanley would open his bottle of whiskey, and then we'd be away, you know, an evening of banter and chat and dirty stories and funny stories and family stories. And I remember taking my pictures around there, a box of pictures around one evening to Charlie's place, and Amelia, my Amelia. Here she is, Amelia, my Amelia, Emily, my Emily. And she was putting the younger children to bed, and then she came downstairs, and she just had this. We had this box of my pictures on the table, and she started opening them, and the tape's running, and she just goes quiet, and she goes, "Poor Charlie." I mean, they'd been married for, I don't know, 20 years or something, and she said, I had no idea that this is what you did in the daytime. I mean, I just find that absolutely amazing. She was this wonderful mother of a big family. Money came in from boiler fluing, and she had no idea that Charlie crawled around in all this dust and did that job. And Charlie was like, again, you're going to put me right, please, but he'd been to a seminary for a while and learned.
Yeah, my grandmother always had visions of him becoming a priest.
A priest,
That's right. Yeah. But, obviously that didn't materialise. Married, 6 children later, working every day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And,
and he was, at the time I photographed him, he was 50.
He learned Latin at school, as most of them did in the
On the film, he says, I know all the Latin, but he also knows all the booze as well. But he was 50, and he was retiring and selling the business up. And why? Because he was ill. And why was he ill? And this again, please stop me, Pat, if I got this wrong, but the way he, you know, this was a man who had something quite seriously wrong with him for crawling around in acid dust most of the time. And I remember saying, well, what's wrong with you, Charlie? You know, he said, I've been troubled with the itches. And I said, oh, what's, itchy? Oh, right, Charlie. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I have a neighbour who's a surgeon, and I went round there and I said, I've got this problem. I've been doing a bottle a day and it's not curing it. And he said, come with me, and they went into the garage where they kept the car, bent him over the bonnet with a torch, and he said, I want you down the Vic tomorrow. And Charlie went, and I don't know what he had some kind of operation. He had to tip the nurse. He was very particular. He had to give a £5 to the nurse. And then I said, well, how are you? And he said, I have a isotope up my backside. And I said, what? He said, they put it in a thing like a 13-amp fuse, stitched it into my backside. He said, it's cured the itches, marvellous. He said, there's only one problem, he said. When I go in the pub and they're watching the boxing, turn my back towards the television, the set goes off. But he'd tell you a story like that, and then we'd be leaving the house. And I remember it was pouring with rain, and it was about 2 a.m, and everybody was, had a lot to drink. And we're walking out into the street, and there were these Macintoshes all hung up in the hall. And Charlie starts remembering chunks of Hamlet and Polonius, stabbing people through the arras. And he's standing on the street, and he's spouting Shakespeare in the pouring rain at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I think he cuts quite a really heroic figure, actually, in those photographs. I mean, they are...
Have I done him service, do you think?
Yeah. More than enough,
I mean, he does cut a really kind of cinematic figure.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, all swathed in those clothes. But I think that's, that again, that's the strength of these wonderful photographs, is that they're such an amazing testament to these people.
Yeah, I love. I carried Charlie in my head because he had this ability to be absolutely filthy, to be very funny, to be very self-deprecating about the fact that he was having to set up his business age 50 because he'd done enough, and also because he had I loved your granddad as well, Jim, who used to play with the grandkids, didn't he? Jim had been a mill engineer.
That's right, there was a mill on Robert Street in Nelson. When they came from Caton near Lancaster, they moved down here for work with my great-grandfather, gamekeepers in the day. But when they ended up at Nelson, at 21, he was running the bank of engines at Roberts's mill on Edward Street in Nelson it was. And that's where maybe grandma was working in the mill, cotton mills as they were in the day. And I always remember her telling the tale. She said that when she went home and said to her dad that she was walking out in the day with somebody who worked at the mill. He asked who it was, and she said it's Jim Sutton, and he runs the engines and the boiler house, if you will, and he's only 21. And the grandma was 12 months older than him. And the granddad worked as a porter, her dad worked as a porter on Nelson railway station, and he was earning 19 shillings and sixpence a week. And I think in the day they used to try and find out how much he was likely to marry into what his earning capacity was. And because he was running all these engines at Nelson, at the mill, he was on £2.10 shillings a week. And supposedly the grandma used to say, whatever you do, don't let that one go.
Well, he used to, I remember he used to fly kites down on the meadow by the canal. And I went down there, I was driving along one day and I saw these kites flying. He used to make them out of bits of we used to have these wonderful, all these words that are still in my head. I remember him saying, I've got 24 twist foil. It's like the finest fabric he'd found somewhere in a fence shop or something. And 24 twist foil. They all talk like they were like Old Testament prophets to me. They really were. They were like shaking the stick at modernity, like we all know it's coming to an end, but we're going to go down like, in the way that they lived in their imaginations fantastically. And I went to photograph him flying kites, and it was just wonderful watching him fly kites, this old chap. And and anyway, what happened was that Charlie tried to sell the business, and Pat, today, look, this is a little piece I ran in Lancashire Life. Pat brought it along today. So that's not bad, is it? He's kept this for 50 years. What was this? 1976, October 76, just short of 50 years. And this is a piece I ran about Charlie but at the bottom it says he's going out of business and he's looking to sell it. And the person who bought the family business was somebody who was alerted to the fact that the business was up for sale because of this article. Yeah. So it's quite nice to, in a small way, give something back, I suppose.
Well, thank you so much for this chat. I'm sure everybody else agrees that it's been really something, and trip down memory lane, but so very important as well. Particularly now, when it seems so remote, but yet so powerful. And obviously we've heard some of Pat's family history, but I'm sure there's lots of people here that are just itching to ask you questions, but also maybe tell us a bit about their experience. So I think at this juncture we'd like to throw it out to the floor and ask if there's any questions or observations.
I want to know about the chimney photograph. Did you actually...
Oh, climbing the chimney, yeah. Well, it wasn't in Pendle, so we're not allowed to mention.
Maybe you can tell what the question was.
Oh yeah, so the question was about the chimney photographs. How did I come to do the photographs of the factory chimney? Stanley introduced me to Peter Tatum, who was a steeplejack from Rochdale. Peter serviced the Bancroft chimney, but he didn't do it in the 2 years while I was there. But I got to know Peter a bit, and again he was another of these people, Stanley, Charlie, Peter, Bessie. These people, they live deep in my head. Peter hardly spoke. He was a man of few words. He used to constantly have Capstan full strength cigarette on the go, and he died, I think, and it was far too early from, I don't know, lung cancer or whatever. But he was like a ballet dancer. He could put these ladders up the side of a chimney, and watching him do it was something special. Obviously, people who, like me, southern boys, why don't you just leave a metal ladder bolted to the side of the chimney all the way up? Well, obviously the reason they didn't do that was because at the top would be the place it would rot first, because you've got all these acidic dusts coming up through the chimney, meets the water and runs down. So the bits that would rot off first would be at the top, and you didn't want to discover that when you were going up. So they would use wooden ladders and put them up the side and attach them, and you can see how they did it in the exhibition. And I got to know Peter pretty well, and we had access in the day. People, health and safety hadn't been invented, And so one day I was photographing him. He said, "Do you want to go up?" And I said, "Well, all right." And I just, he just finished laddering. I got to the top. I think there were, it says there, anyway, it's about 160 feet up. And so there's one ladder on top of another going up the side. And going up a chimney is, it's not like going up a ladder, that you put against the house to fix the guttering, because that's at that angle, but it's vertical like that. So as soon as you start climbing, your weight's all being pulled down. I don't know, I used to have a camera bag that I had 3 camera bodies and 4 lenses in it. And if you took a camera out, then obviously the camera bag got smaller. So when I was climbing a chimney, I probably had maybe 2 cameras around my neck and a spare one in the bag. And you're going up, and Peter would just say, there's a couple of things you need to know before we do this, Daniel. One is that you always hold the sides, don't hold the rungs. If you hold the sides, you've got 2 hands on the ladder at all times. If you roll the rungs, you've only got 1 at a time. And if the rung gets away, then you go too. So you've got to both hands. So ever since then, I use both hands climbing a ladder. You go straight up, and you keep going, and yeah, obviously the ground's disappearing behind you, but you need strength. And I've been watching him like a ballet dancer, looping one leg between the rungs. He's got a 5-pound hammer, and he's banging above his head, and he's putting these things into the wall, and lashing them on, and then pulling them up and going up, and gradually getting up and get to the top. Okay, so if he's done it, and then you're following him. The other thing you need to know, Daniel, is I'm going first, because if you fall off, you'll knock me off. So yeah, I don't know, there are 15 feet each, so are there 12 ladders or something like that, going up, so you're going up, and then you get near the top, and what you don't realise when you're looking at it from the ground is at the top they have these things called oversailers, which is like a brick-built cap. It's like a rim, it's like the rim of a hat, and the idea is that the sooty dust coming out of the chimney in the smoke will roll down the side a little bit but be dispersed. And it's a cast iron, although it's a mixture of brick and cast iron, this thing. And you're going up, and you go, God, I'm getting tired, this is terrible. And you look down, you go, Dad, look down. Just keep going, watching the wall go moving in front of me. And then I look up and, oh God, it goes out. And then suddenly you're all on your hands and you're 150 feet up, Woo, leaning out backwards. And at that point I thought, oh damn it, I'm just going to drop off. And then Peter, bless him, I remember he just leant over and he just grabbed hold of me, and he's a big strong bloke, and he just pulled me over the top. And then you climb up the last little bit, and of course you're sitting astride the wall, like this. Because of course it just goes round in a circle, doesn't it? So you've got a big hole down there, and the place you've come up is just there. And he had 2 blokes working with him, Andy and Higgy. And Higgy said, one thing you need to know, Daniel, is don't look at the horizon. And of course you do, so don't look at the horizon. And he's going like this. Because the chimney's moving all the time. you don't realise that. So you learn all this stuff when you're a photographer. It's brilliant being a photographer. Honestly, if you haven't worked out what you want to do in your life, go and be a photographer. It's great. So anyway, you're sitting on top of this chimney going like this. And then they get out car jacks and great big lump hammers, and they're drilling holes in the cast iron cap, and they're breaking up this thing that you're sitting on. And then they have this rule: if anybody's on the ladder, then they can't work if there's someone on the ladder. So I'm up there, I'm holding them up really, because I'm not contributing to the business of demolishing this chimney piece by piece as they're taking it down. And so they said, after a while, they said, Daniel, it's time you went down. And Higgy says, all right, I'll look after him, Peter. And Higgy puts his arm out to hold the top of the ladder. And I said, well, before I go down, I want to do a picture of Peter. So Peter, because he stopped working, he's leaning, he's just lying on the top of this wall. Righto, a picture taken now. Right? All of Manchester behind him. And so I do this picture, but obviously I need both hands to take the photograph. So Higgy's holding on to me with one hand. But of course, if you look at the photograph, you'll see that the arm he's been holding me on with is broken. It's in plaster. He's got a broken arm. He's holding me on. He's broken.
Yeah.
So I did go up 2 or 3 times, but only once over the Overside. The next time I came back, they really do it. It was a weekend job. They had a whole railway viaduct they were pointing somewhere up in, I don't know where it was, up in Lancashire somewhere. And then they were knocking this chimney in Salford down at weekends. So I did go back and climbed it a few more times, but that was the only time I went over the Overside.
How did you get back over that?
Well, exactly. It's not easy. You've got to go back over that bump on the way down, yeah.
And how did he get up with a broken arm?
Well, he just climbed it like everybody else, yeah.
I wonder if there are any more.
Yes, sorry. And more stop anecdotes and serious questions from... There's a woman called Mrs. Dugdale. You are here. There she is.
Are you alright?
Thank you for coming. This is... You're the daughter of one of the 2 women photographed at Mel Farm Manufacturing in Colne.
Daughter of one and the niece of the other.
Yes, you do, yeah.
Well, thank you for coming. It's lovely that you came, and I love it. And what's been nice was we're doing this sort of thing again with Stanley, actually, the mill engineer. Stanley's 90 odd, and he lives in Barnoldswick, and he's not very good on his pins these days. So we're doing a day on the 5th, is it? 5th and 5th of September at Bancroft, and Stanley will be there.
It'll be unmissable.
Yes. I've forgotten, I've lost my train of thought now. I'll give you the microphone. Anyway, sorry, I've lost it. Finally lost it.
Well, I think just referring to your presence, I think probably at Bancroft there'll be other people there as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's what I was going to say. Sorry. Well, when this exhibition that you're looking at is a recreation of an exhibition that was made by a group of very important group called the Half Moon Photography Workshop in London back in 1978. They put this show together, and the idea was to highlight the working lives of people that weren't otherwise appreciated, so they made this exhibition, and it travelled everywhere. It went all over. It went to Germany. It went all over the place, and eventually it wore itself out and was thrown away. And because it's 50 years since we made this work, that archive from the Half Moon Photography Workshop now belongs with a group of people called Four Corners, who are also a left-wing organisation based in Bethnal Green. And they and the Bodleian and you from Super Slow Way and Mid-Pennine Arts, to put an exhibition on like this requires a lot of people getting together. Graham Ridley's here from Bancroft as well. All of it requires a knitting together of nothing in order to just make it happen.
Yeah.
And at the time when Four Corners finally got this show remade, it took me ages at the Bodleian going through all my negatives, trying to find which were all the pictures and how they all fit together. When they did that, the BBC came and made a little film about me and Stanley, which is, Graham was telling me, they're playing at the Bancroft Mill Engine Museum. And that's where you saw it, yeah. And
the picture was behind the presenters of the mum and the auntie.
That's right. It was a weird day. It was a very
So
weird...
you didn't have a copy?
No.
No.
It was
We
a...
tried and looking down and tried. I couldn't get one from the leader. For ages, we couldn't find them. No, we'd seen the exhibition years ago when it was in Oregon. And we thought, oh, leader will have them. Anyway, there was no joy there. No.
No joy at the leader.
So, that was right on BBC. So I rang them and I said, hey, just watch BBC.
It was a very weird day because it was the day the Pope was supposed to have died, if you remember. Everybody was waiting for the Pope to die. And he didn't die, and they were a bit short of stuff. So they made this film about me and Stanley. And when they'd interviewed Stanley in Barnoldswick, they'd interviewed me in London. And then they put the two bits together, and they made this little film, and they put it on breakfast television, lunch television, evening television.
Wow.
It was edited slightly differently each time. And so it was on all day, and you must have spotted it. Yeah, and your mum and your auntie are in the back, big in the background, smiling, laughing. But one of the things I really like about that picture is that underneath, although they're not wearing clogs, underneath the seat where they are having their fag break, there's a pair of clogs. So I mean, there's always, you know, when I took these pictures, they're not accidents. You know, I'm trying to show this exact thing that you were talking about, that we were at the end of something that had been a revolution in this area. And so, you know, I loved the two of them giggling there, having a cigarette in the smoke break and everything. But I was also very aware of that pair of clogs under the seat.
Really aware of all the animal behind them.
Yeah, and fabric, I mean, in the air,
Well, like you said, your dad come over all the door and all over it. That was everywhere.
Absolutely, wasn't it?
Never, never phased him, obviously, because we were both out there having a fact.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I'm sure that there's going to be time for Daniel's going to be hanging around. But sorry.
The time you spent up here on this project, how much influence do you think it had on the rest of your career?
I think it was very important. It was important because I put together a massive amount of work that I didn't know how to handle, and it's taken 50 years to be able to get it into a shape that we can all look at it. With the audio recordings, I really like the fact that we've been able to include some of the audio recordings in the exhibition. The other thing is that there's, you know, you'll probably all think posh boy from the south has been taking the mick out of us all morning, imitating our accent. But that's all part of actually how documentary's changed. You know, at the risk of sounding too serious, the practice of documentary photography has changed, or documentary practice has changed incredibly because of the coming of the digital age, in that it's possible for people to tell their own stories now. And it happens a lot. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good, but it does happen a lot. Whereas at that time, I was one of the last of a generation where, you know, educated middle-class boys went to art school, learned stuff, and got mixed up with working-class communities through their work. And I'm really incredibly grateful for that having happened. Later, as I began to embrace the technical changes that were happening, I pioneered a project for the BBC in South Wales called Digital Storytelling, where we took a lab of computers out into miners' institutes, village halls, colleges, pubs, and we got people to make their own 2 minutes of TV. This is right at the beginning of the digital revolution, around the millennium. And so, yeah, my work as a documentarist has moved forward over my working life. But a lot of it was really grounded here, because I started working in multimedia at a time when nobody else was. I was making sounds and making pictures and starting to put the two together. And yeah, so it made a massive difference to my life. You know, that at the age of 23, I came here and was exposed to all of this incredibly rich culture.
Oh, it must have been so formative. Yeah. Yes.
I'd just like to correct your record regarding kissing the shuttle. I started work in '54 in the middle, we were still kissing shuttles then. What you said about the disease that they all got, I don't agree with that, because one person was only kissing their own shuttles. There was nobody else kissing. The disease they got was the dust from the cotton in the lungs, as far as I know.
Right.
Okay, I stand corrected. In the film, it's not me that says it, it's Bessie who says it, yeah. So.
I think there was someone else had their hand up. No?
I was going to ask the question that the gentleman behind asked, but instead I've got one that might be doing that.
Right.
I'm not into photography, etc. Why is everything in black and white?
Well, colour photography was extraordinarily expensive. In those days, it was very, very expensive. And there was, as I told you, I didn't have any money for materials, so there was no way I was going to be photographing in colour. But there was another thing too, which is that I've always believed in kind of building community around the work that I do. So if I'm making pictures, I want to print them, put them in a box and take them back to the people that I've been working with. So one of the reasons you have audio recordings is that I would sit down with the person whose pictures I'd photographed and run a tape recorder and listen to them talking about their jobs in relation to the pictures that I'd done, which would help me then edit and also help me with writing captions. To be able to turn around that number of colour prints would have been, you'd have been needed to be a millionaire to do that. You really would. It was ridiculously expensive, and so it never occurred to me to work in colour. I've always wanted to work in colour, but it was just beyond my reach, you know.
Daniel, what was your film of choice? What film did you use?
Tri-X. I used Tri-X, 35mm, and the cameras I used were Olympuses. I had 3 OM. There was the OM1, OM2, OM2N bodies, and I always had 4 lenses: 35, 28, 35, 50, and 100mm lens, and I had a little flash gun as well. That was it. It all fit in one bag. Those Olympus cameras are really small, beautiful things.
I could see some grins of delight when you answered that question. Well, I'm sure that Daniel's going to hang around for a little while longer, so I'm sure if there are questions that occur to you or conversations that you might want to have with him, he might be pleased to have.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But otherwise, can I just say thank you very much for coming, and thank you so much to Daniel.
Save our sheds from unemployment, that's all that we demand. 'Cause we're clemming and we're starving with no money in our hands. Redeployment is the answer from a Whitehall's empty mouth. Come and leave your friends and your family, there's a job for you down south. Now, the cotton mills are closing down all over Lancashire, from Oldham to the Mersey, and from Burnley to the Wine. All along the Rosendale, you'll hear a mournful cry, and the wind across the Pennines heaves a low and deathly sigh. Well, now,
After a look around the Shuttle, Steam and Soot exhibition, I caught up with Daniel and asked him how it felt to be back at Queen Street Mill 50 years on.
Well, I think it's gone wonderfully today. I mean, I loved the number. No, my pleasure. Thank you. I loved the number of people who came, and you know, being back in a mill with the smell of the oil and the, you know, it's impregnated in the building, isn't it? And you remember those things, and there's no other smell like it. So coming back, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this, and yeah, it's very special. I mean, Queen Street is a very, very special mill, and I remember when it was running, and I remember that it was, you know, obviously going to have to fold because it was burning coal, and we had the Clean Air Act and all the rest of it, quite apart from all the other issues around the market and so on. And I remember thinking, this is the end of something that's really important and I need to photograph. And it's lovely that 50 years on, people can appreciate that. It's really lovely, very, validating.
What advice would you give a young photographer coming into the profession today?
Well, you know, I think the best thing that you can do as a young person starting out is to photograph the things that are familiar, the stuff you know. Don't always be going looking for the stuff you don't know. Go looking for the stuff you do know. But, you know, this is the world of documentary. Photograph the stuff you do know and then wait 50 years. And then people will go, oh wow, that's what it was like? Yeah, so I mean, there are a number of things that change all the time. People's kitchens, You know, if you haven't photographed, you call yourself a documentary photographer and you haven't photographed your kitchen or your mum's kitchen or your auntie's kitchen, photograph it, because it'll look completely different in another 10 years, 20 years. But in 50 years it'll be unrecognisable.
Daniel Meadows, thank you very much for talking to Burnley filmmakers.
It's been my pleasure, it's been a lovely day.
As the sun sets over Pendle and the rain begins to fall, government in Westminster must heed the Weaver's call, and the glory that was England.
The Shuttles Steam and Soot exhibition by Daniel Meadows is on show at Queen Street Mill until August 29th, and well worth a visit.
Mills are closing down all over Lancashire, from Oldham to the Mersey and from Burnley to the Wyre, and all along the Rossendale you'll hear a mournful cry, and the wind across the Pennines heaves a low